The wind moved slowly through the tall grass, as if even nature had grown old with him. He stood at the edge of the forest he had walked for nearly 40 years, his boots heavy with time, his shoulders stooped with stories no one had asked to hear. The villagers still called him Baba John, but most of them had never known the fire that once lived in his stride. The world had changed, fast and loud, but he had remained, a relic of a quieter, wilder time. Beside him stood Rahi. The horse was old now, his once black coat dusted with white like snow on an autumn mountain. Scars lined his flanks like a map of places they'd survived, the deep one on his right leg from a wolf ambush, the faded one near his neck from falling stones during a landslide rescue. His eyes, though, still held the same quiet flame, a knowing, a memory, the kind of soul that doesn't come again. They had met 3 decades ago. The ranger had found the colt by a riverbank, half drowned and limping, his mother taken by the flood. He should have left him. It would have been easier, but the colt looked up at him, not begging, not broken, just waiting. That look had bound him forever. He carried Rahi home on his shoulders that day, and the horse had carried his heart every day since. Through blazing summers and bone-deep winters, over cracked deserts and thunderous cliffs, they had moved together like shadow and flame. No rope had ever bound Rahi to him. No bit, no whip, just the kind of trust that only comes from surviving things most creatures never talk about. People whispered stories about the two of them, that they could smell storms before clouds formed, that Rahi could sense danger hours away, that the ranger once fought off poachers with nothing but a torch and a horse by his side, rearing like a creature out of legend. But the old man never spoke of these tales. What they had wasn't meant for crowds. It lived in quiet rides at dawn, in the pause before a creek crossing, in the warmth of Rahi's breath against his arm on cold nights. Now, the silence was louder than ever. The ranger knew the forest better than he knew himself, yet today it felt like it was watching him, as if even the trees knew the end of something had begun. He placed a hand on Rahi's neck, the old stallion leaning gently into it. No words passed between them. None were needed. This was not a story about a man and his horse. It was a story about two lives so deeply woven into each other that even the earth had trouble telling them apart. And somewhere deep inside him, the old ranger knew their final journey was near. It had been the kind of storm that leaves the earth shivering for days afterward. The sky had split open like an old wound, pouring down anger, water, and broken trees. Rivers had risen without mercy, swallowing bridges, homes, even the old trails. The forest was not a place to wander in those days, but he had gone anyway. He had heard the cries during patrol, faint, swallowed by wind and rain, almost mistaken for the rustling of leaves. But it had been something else, something living, something fighting. The ranger had followed the sound, slipping down a mud-slick ravine, thorns clawing at his arms. That was when he saw it. A small black colt, half submerged in the river's edge, its leg twisted unnaturally, chest heaving with effort. The mother lay nearby, already gone. Her body, broken by a fallen tree, shielded the colt from the worst of the flood. He could have walked away. Nature had its way, but the colt met his gaze, not with fear, but with quiet defiance. A flicker of fight remained in those wide, storm-soaked eyes. It was not a plea. It was a challenge. He spent hours getting the animal out, binding the leg with cloth torn from his own shirt, hoisting the colt across his shoulders as they climbed out together, inch by inch, step by bleeding step. That was the day the bond was born, not from kindness, not from command, but from the shared weight of survival. He named him Rahi, the traveler. It fit him. Even injured, the colt's eyes held the road, the storm, the hunger to move. At first, Rahi would not be touched. He would limp to the edges of the forest when the ranger approached. But he never fled. He always stayed within sight. Days passed. The ranger left food near the clearing. The colt didn't eat until the man was gone. But each morning, the bowl was empty. Then one morning, he found Rahi standing at the door of the cabin, head bowed, not as surrender, but as recognition. From that day on, they were one. Years flowed like rivers. Rahi grew into a stallion, strong, proud, faster than the wind on a dry hill. but never tamed. He never wore a saddle, never accepted a rider from a village. Only the ranger. The old man didn't own Rahi. He walked beside him. He whispered not with words, but with glances, silences, and long rides under starlight. Their stories became the forest's own. There was a time when monsoon rains had cut off the valley trails, and a mother and her child were lost in the rising mist. The ranger had gone in search of them for hours, but it was Rahi who found them. The stallion stopped suddenly mid-path, snorted sharply, and charged through a cluster of brush that led to a hidden ravine. Down there, wrapped in wet cloth, the woman clutched her child, blue-lipped and unconscious. The ranger carried them both on Rahi's back that day, all the way back to the village. Not once did the stallion slow. Then came the wildfire summer. A spark from careless campers had ignited the dry grass, and soon the western ridge was ablaze. The wind pushed the flames with monstrous speed, and the village children playing near the foothills had no idea. The ranger mounted Rahi, and they flew, no other word fits, through black smoke and red sky, between falling branches and walls of heat. His shirt caught fire at one point. Rahi didn't flinch. They reached the children just in time, guiding them down a narrow gully. The horse circled them like a guardian, snorting at the flames, pawing the ground until the last child was safe. When the village elders thanked him, he only nodded toward Rahi. "I just held on," he said. He did the rest. There were nights when neither of them slept, when poachers came, silent and cruel, hunting for tiger skins and rhino horns. It was Rahi's ears that twitched first, his hoofs scraping the ground in warning. More than once, they confronted danger with nothing but a flare and a pair of old eyes that had seen too much. And Rahi, rearing against the moonlight like some ancient creature myth, had become a ghost story in those parts. Some said he wasn't a horse anymore, but a spirit that walked with a forest will. The ranger never denied it. Some things are true even if they sound like lies. But the years changed them both. Rahi's gallop became slower, his breathing heavier. The black in his mane faded to smoke gray. Still, every morning, he stood by the cabin gate, waiting, not for food, not for orders, just for the ride, even if it was short, even if it hurt. And the ranger, he too had grown quieter, his hair now white, fingers swollen from old breaks, lungs heavy with the weight of 1,000 campfires. But when he rode Rahi, the years melted. They were boys again, running through wildflower meadows, chasing birds, leaping fallen logs. They never needed words, never needed reins. There were no good boys, no treats, no training. Just the sound of hooves on dry earth. Just the silence of two old souls who didn't belong anywhere else except beside each other. People came and went. Generations moved on. But the ranger and his horse remained. Constant, unchanging, like a mountain shadow always nearby. Now, when the ranger sat on the porch at dusk, Rahi stood near him. Sometimes he would lay his head gently on the man's lap, and the ranger would run a callous hand through his mane, feeling the ridges of old scars beneath the fur. "Still with me?" the ranger would whisper. Rahi would blink once. Always. The morning was unusually still. No rustling leaves. No chirping birds. Just the heavy breath of the earth beneath a pale sky. The old ranger stood at the threshold of his weathered cabin, eyes fixed on the horizon, where a thin line of smoke rose like a whisper into the heavens. He had seen that signal before. A beacon from the northern ridges, one used only in great peril. Maybe a landslide. Maybe a child lost in the misted valleys. Maybe the wild fever again. Whatever it was calling him, and he was too old to answer. His joints ached. His back creaked like the pines he once scaled in youth. But deep in the pain in his body was the ache in his soul, a quiet knowing that this would be the last time. The forest was murmuring its goodbye already, each breeze brushing his skin like a farewell hand. Inside the stable, Rahi lifted his head. The stallion, once the wildest heart in the northern belt, now bore his years like frost on stone. His mane was grayer than dusk, his legs stiff from too many winters, but his eyes, those eyes still held fire. "Ek or bar, Sathi," the ranger whispered, laying his hand on Rahi's brow. Rahi exhaled, a deep, thunderous breath that stirred the dust on the stable floor. He understood. No saddle was needed, only trust. By midday, they were riding, slowly at first, for the ranger's bones protested, and Rye's gait was cautious. But as the wind rose and the trail began to climb, they fell into the rhythm that had always been theirs. Hooves against earth, heart against time. The trees grew denser, older, as if the forest too was watching. Vultures circled above the cliffs but did not cry. Even the mountain streams seemed to hush their song. Every living thing, it seemed, was bearing witness. They crossed a broken bridge where Rahi had once leapt over a flooding river. They passed a ravine where the ranger had carried a feverish child on his back for 2 days straight, while Rahi had kept vigil all night without food or rest. Memories trailed behind them like shadows. A sudden cry echoed across the valley. A hawk's call this time, sharp and urgent. The ranger looked up. Storm clouds were gathering fast. The beacon smoke was now barely visible through the swirling winds. They would have to climb higher. The trail turned treacherous. Loose stones slid under Rahi's hooves. The ranger felt every misstep in his ribs, but he said nothing. Just one more ride. Just one more hill. Rahi snorted, breath labored but steady, and pressed on. Halfway up the slope, they saw them, a mother and her small daughter, huddled under an outcrop of rock, the girl coughing violently. The ranger dismounted, knees shaking, and knelt beside her. Her skin was hot with fever, her eyes unfocused. From his satchel, he pulled out the wrapped cloth, medicine herbs, ground root, dry berries, all blended from forest knowledge passed down for generations. He coaxed it gently between the girl's lips. She winced, then swallowed. "Yet calm Karega," he whispered to the mother, who wept softly in thanks. But they were not safe yet. The storm was breaking. Thunder cracked across the ridgeline as the first drops fell. They had to get the girl down quickly, or the cold would undo everything. The mother was too weak to carry her. The ranger turned to Rahi, and the stallion stepped forward. No hesitation, no fear, just the same quiet strength he'd shown since he was a limping colt rescued from a hunting trap. The ranger lifted the child onto Rahi's back, tied her gently against the saddle horn with his own shawl. The mother followed on foot as the trio made their way back down the winding path. Lightning lit the world white. Trees bent in the wind. The earth groaned beneath them, but Rahi moved as if time itself were holding its breath for him. Each step was a promise. Each breath, a prayer. By the time they reached the lower valley, the girl was breathing easier. The storm was behind them. The worst had passed. But Rahi was faltering. The ranger felt it in the way the stallion's legs trembled, in the soft wheeze of each exhale. He helped the girl down, then laid Rahi gently on a patch of grass near the river's edge. He sat beside him, fingers on the horse's mane, heart caught between pride and grief. "You brought her home," he said softly, voice breaking. "Just like always." Rahi blinked slowly, his chest rising and falling like waves before a final tide. The ranger pressed his forehead against Rahi's, their breath mingling. Man and beast, warrior and warhorse, friends born of earth and fire. As the stars began to pierce the dusk sky, Rahi gave one last breath. It was not a gasp, not a cry, just peace. The ranger sat there for hours, unmoving. When he finally rose, he did so with a reverence usually reserved for kings. He built a cairn of stones over Rahi's resting place, each stone a memory. And when the last one was set, he tied Rahi's old reins around the top, a marker, a monument, a goodbye. He turned back toward the mountains, alone now, but something had changed. He had given everything, and so had Rahi. Their final journey wasn't just about saving a life. It was about closing a chapter only the wind would remember. And as the forest sighed and the stars gathered above, the ranger walked on, his heart heavier, his soul lighter. The earth was soft beneath the cedar tree, wet from melted snow, dark and silent. The villagers worked quietly with their hands, digging through roots and memory. No one spoke much. Words were useless now. The old ranger sat beside Rahi's lifeless body, one hand still resting gently on the stallion's muzzle. His face, creased with age and sorrow, seemed carved from stone, yet his eyes were oceans. He hadn't let go of Rahi all night, even after the storm had passed. Even after they had found him and begged him come inside and rest, he had refused. "This is where I stay," he had said softly, "until he is ready." And now it was time. Rahi's body, wrapped with care and wool and garlands of pine and wildflowers by the children, was lifted gently. It took 6 strong men to carry him to the top of the hill, a hill where Rahi had once galloped free beneath a younger sun, where he had reared up and danced against thunderclouds, where the ranger had once whispered to him, "If I die first, scatter me here, and if you do, I'll wait for you." But fate had reversed the order. At the peak, beneath a wide sky dusted with morning gold, they laid him down. The ranger stepped forward alone. He looked at the crowd gathered. Children, old farmers, hunters, the baker who once feared horses but had learned to trust Rahi. He took a long breath and placed something beside Rahi's head, a small, worn leather pouch. Inside were things no one else knew. The broken compass Rahi had found in a cave, a lock of mane from when the ranger had once tried to cut his hair for the first and last time, a tiny flute used to call him when whistles failed. Then he stepped back, and the earth began to fall. The sound was soft like rain. Each handful of soil was a goodbye. When the grave was covered, the ranger stood alone again. His knees shook, and for a moment it seemed he might fall, but he didn't. He reached into his coat and drew a knife, old, dulled by years of survival. He turned to the cedar tree and carved slowly, deliberately. Each motion was painful, but steady. When he stepped away, the words etched into the bark read, "Here rests Rahi, my heart with hooves." And below that, he never stopped running. Years passed. The season spun like wheels, and the ranger grew older still. His body slowed, but his mornings did not change. Every day at sunrise, he climbed the hill, sometimes with tea, sometimes with apples, sometimes with just his silence. He would sit by the cedar, fingers brushing the bark, and whisper stories to the grave, about the time they outran a wildfire, about the time they helped a lost boy find his way by starlight, about the way Rahi once refused to leave him behind during a blizzard, pressing his warm body against him through the night. He smiled through tears, again and again. Even in solitude, he was never truly alone. The villagers began to visit the hill, too, leaving feathers, pebbles, and tiny wooden carvings shaped like horses. Children would come and listen to the ranger's tales. Did Rahi really jump over the river in one leap? Was he scared of thunder? Did he love you? And the ranger would always answer the same way. He didn't love me. He chose me. There's a difference. And then one spring morning, the ranger stopped coming. His cottage remained quiet. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney. The villagers searched, hearts heavy. They found him inside, peaceful, sitting in his old chair, clutching a worn photograph of a younger man beside a wild black stallion. His eyes were closed, and he was smiling. They buried him beside Rahi, not beneath the tree, but just close enough that the shadows touched both graves at sunset. A new carving was made beside the old one. It read, "Together again, 2 souls, 1 journey." Today, the hill is sacred. No one farms it. No one builds near it. Children still visit, some with their own ponies. Elders bring flowers. Travelers leave offerings of apples or whisper prayers to the wind. And always, someone reads the words carved into bark. "Here rests Rahi, my heart with hooves." He never stopped running. Legends are not born, they are earned. And Rahi earned his, through fire and storm, through loyalty and love, through sacrifice. Even now, when the wind rushes down the valley and rustles the tall grass, some swear they hear it, the echo of hooves on stone. And somewhere in the clouds above, a ranger and his horse ride still, across skies wide enough to hold 1,000 memories. If this story touched your heart, share it. Let others know that even in a world growing colder, there are still tales of warmth, loyalty, and undying friendship. Like this story, subscribe for more emotional wildlife legends and timeless bonds between humans and the creatures who walk beside us. Dove, like, share, subscribe, honor the legacy. Let the world remember Rahi never stopped running. dove,